Seriously.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you guys?
Good. We appreciate you all.
Awesome.
I didn't even move my chair as high as Crystal's.
I'm like,
This is a first. Don't worry. Don't worry.
My office.
When I said you all were joining from the same, when you said you were joining from the same computer, I was like, this will be a first. This will be awesome.
Like, do you want to go back to your office?
Thank you both so much for the time and energy. So we got a bunch of questions from we're gonna throw them at you, sort of rapid fire. Later, we're gonna ask if you're both gonna start a company together because of the dynamic of sitting in the same office talking about two different companies. Like, could you just spend your time differently and just save some investors' time, I guess. I'll have to talk about two different things with both of you. So we'll start off with the question, and for both of you, of if you can give just a quick background, who you are, and then background in the, so I think people see obviously the press releases, the fame, and but they might not see some of that background of what time did you spend in the sort of traditional, I guess we'll call it, healthcare system. So if both of you could speak to a little bit about your time there and who you are and what you do now.
Cool.
So good. Okay, cool. You can go first.
There you go. Ladies first.
All right. So hi everyone. My name is Crystal now Adesanya. I'm known as Crystal Ivolocha, but Crystal Adesanya. Now, I changed my name on my LinkedIn. I don't know if you guys noticed that. And I made an announcement this morning saying, hey, my name is Crystal Adesanya now. So I took Ade's last name. So
it seems like there's some reservation there.
Well, there has to be. It's the reality of the nature of our work, you know, but in a good way. Kind of came full circle. I finally got my Social Security thing with my new name. So I'm official.
It's official now. No turning back.
It's official. But hey, I'm Crystal. I'm CEO and co-founder of Kira Health. We're a digital health company based out in Los Angeles, and we work primarily with young women, connecting them to clinicians, so OBGYNs, nurse practitioners, mental health experts, and so forth, to answer questions that they might have and deliver all forms of telemedicine, so video visits, prescriptions, and things like that, all from the comfort of their homes. So I started the company in 2018, and we've been running ever since then. We were known as Clit Health in the beginning under a different name, and then we rebranded to Kira in 2020 during the pandemic, when we switched over to offering full telemedicine. So kind of for context with that, so I guess I could start with like my background. So I'm originally from Nigeria. I moved to the US for college. That was actually where I met Ade in college. So I met him in college. I was a freshman, he was a senior then. So you can imagine that dynamic. And, you know, I come from a very conservative background, so didn't quite have a lot of introduction into like women's health or talking about your care or anything like that. So I spent a lot of time on the internet, so Googling all my symptoms and trying to find resources, because I wasn't really comfortable, you know, talking about what's going on. So, you know, I ended up self-medicating after Googling. As you know, Dr. Google did not go to med school. So there's lots of different things that came with that experience. And, I self-medicated. I felt really bad pain after. I actually passed out and was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery in a very, very different condition from what I was Googling and medicating for. And, you can imagine like the dynamic of like, I'm an international student at this point from Nigeria, didn't have my family or anything there, navigating schoolwork, and then now navigating my healthcare. So post that experience, started talking to a lot of people about their health. And what I didn't know back then was customer discovery, so to speak, right? So asking like, hey, like, what's your experience with your healthcare? Like, why don't you go to the health center? And, things like that. And I became a real advocate for health, specifically for young women. And in that time, you know, the concept was created or formed, right? But I didn't go straight into building this company. I actually was running another company then, which was an e-commerce company for men's accessories. So think about like ties, bow ties, lapel pins, and things like that. So I've always been an entrepreneur, but didn't quite go into the healthcare field until this experience. And then, you know, fast forward to 2018, when I started this company. But prior to that, I was working in real estate investments as an analyst. So talking to investors every day and all that stuff, which then I didn't quite know was going to be my day job with a different company. So I spent all my time on investor calls these days, and it's kind of like, you know, based on my background. So yeah, that's a little bit of everything. And I'll talk a little bit more about my journey, but yeah, that's me.
Cool. So I guess it's my turn. So hi everyone, I am Ade Adesonia, co-founder and president of Movie Analytics. So Movie Analytics at a high level, we are a telehealth provider that focuses on helping people recover after a cardiac event. So we help people do cardiac rehab at home through an app-based approach. So patients get an app on their phone, they get a kit that has different devices to help them monitor their health, like a blood pressure cuff, a fitness tracker, some other devices. And then we pair them up with a telehealth nurse. That's kind of their guide through the first year after a heart attack. And the goal is really to help those patients with kind of all the things they should be doing from a secondary prevention perspective, you know, so that they don't get a second heart attack. So that's what Movie Analytics does. So Movie Analytics has been around for 8 years. So when you talk about like the trenches, you know, we've been doing this for a long time. So my personal background, very similar to Crystal. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I came to the US when I was 17, and I went to the University of Houston. So I actually studied electrical engineering during undergrad. And it was kind of during that experience, I also got my first kind of taste of entrepreneurship. So on campus back then, I started a different company called Give Pals, which was a Craigslist for your campus. So the whole idea was, how do you help people on campus to trade textbooks with each other, to, you know, buy and sell services and things like that. So I did that, and it was really inspired by watching the Social Network movie. You know, so you know, me and a bunch of my friends saw that movie and we're like, what are we doing with our lives? So let's go start a company. And so we we ended up doing that. And so that experience kind of really opened my eyes to the power of taking an idea from just your personal experience or your frustrations off your head and actually realizing it. We had 3,000 users on campus. Crystal was one of our users back then. and so, you know, that company, we got users, but we were in Houston, Texas, and, you know, there was really no ecosystem for entrepreneurship and venture capital, all these things that everybody's so familiar with back then. And so I decided that I was going to move out of Houston and go to California because I just wanted to be in Silicon Valley and be around everybody that was doing this kind of stuff. So I decided to go back to grad school. And so I came to LA and I went to USC for grad school. And I studied engineering management during grad school. But I got this really awesome job at the Innovation Center at USC, where I was helping researchers who wanted to start up companies from their research. And I was supposed to help them figure it out. So they were looking for someone that had an engineering background that could understand all these very complex things they were doing, but also had a business background that could help them kind of figure out, you know, how to raise money, how to build a team, and all this kind of stuff. So I got both opportunities. So I got into USC and I got this job. I had never been to LA before. So I paid someone to drive my car from Houston to LAX. And I flew to LAX on Sunday morning. I got my keys and I was in LA. I had way more time, way more fun just at my job because I really got to work with some very brilliant people. And, you know, one of the things I learned from that experience was, you know, when you think about people who are doing amazing things, you often think they're very special or they're unique. And just doing my job, I learned the opposite, that, you know, they were just everyday people like me. And so from that experience, that's actually how I met my co-founder from Movie Analytics. So Harsh, who's my co-founder and CEO, was a postdoc at USC, and he was doing some research in physical activity and how to motivate people to exercise more. And so he was trying to build an app based on his research. And my boss back then assigned me to his project. And I always joke that, 8 years after, I'm still working on the same project. So that's kind of how we got started. So that's a very high level overview of just, my journey here. It's interesting. Crystal and I don't have healthcare backgrounds or anything about it. And we're building healthcare companies. And that's just really come from, in Crystal's case, personal experience. And in my case, just doing research about like, hey, where in healthcare can we help people exercise more? And we started digging more into that. And we found this opportunity in cardiac rehab. So I always feel like, people in healthcare, should definitely have a leg up in building healthcare companies. And I think that's something that I actually encourage more is, as different people on this call who'll be either clinicians or administrators in healthcare, as you kind of run through different problems that you think and you're like, man, this is so frustrating. You should think about, is there a solution for it? And maybe you can go start another healthcare company. So that's my background, but nice to be here and be with everybody.
Absolutely. Love that. You're talking to the right set of folks today. Certainly folks that want to get in the game and do things and be a part of the change. So with that being said, a lot of our members, Alex and I, we, still operate in the 9-to-5 world or the 12-to-12 world. We still rely on a check from somebody every other week or month. So based on your experience, could you do what you do now and still be working for a company? And if not, how do folks on the call get started?
So I have interesting perspective on that. So I don't think I can do what I'm doing now at the scale at which I'm doing now and work for another company. Human beings are usually good at one thing, right? And so you kind of have to put a lot of effort into it if you really want it to grow. So I think you kind of have to do one. I do think though that being in a 9-to-5 is very important in terms of a lot of the ideas, so let's say 5 years ago or 10 years ago, people could be in the shower and they'll come up with this big idea and they'll go build an app for it, right? I feel like most of those ideas are gone. The ideas that are just like so basic that you could just go do. And a lot of the ideas that are available now are in the inefficiencies of how things work. So when you think about you guys are in healthcare, you're seeing different problems. I feel like at a 9-to-5, that's probably the best place for you to kind of find your next idea that you're going to go work on. And it's a good place to also kind of incubate that idea and to build the networks that you're going to need to go launch that business. I think one of the downsides of being an entrepreneur that doesn't have a background in the industry you're trying to serve is that you actually spend a lot of time trying to build that network or build that industry expertise. And so in my case, the first 3 to 4 years of building movie analytics was just really understanding what the healthcare was and how it worked and trying to build the right relationships. So, everyone tries to glamorize the entrepreneurial life. Everybody needs a paycheck, including entrepreneurs. So I think that your 9-to-5 is also a perfect opportunity for you to think about saving some money as well, so that you can kind of, when you find the right idea and opportunity, you can go build it. But that's my perspective.
Yeah, I think me and Ade have very different experiences for sure. In this, I guess, particular subject, because Ade, on the other hand, he didn't quite work a 9-to-5 for a very long time outside of the research stuff that you did, but I did. And I remember, when I was, like I said, I was running a company before, and what ended up happening when I was working my 9-to-5 was I treated that company as a side hustle for a very long time. So it was pretty much impossible for it to take off, because I would work all day and then try to do that, fulfill orders, do a bunch of things, because it was e-commerce, right? So it was really difficult for me then. And then I eventually said, you know what, I'm going to quit this and I'm going to do this full time, right? but I wasn't quite ready, because one of the bigger things that you have to think about before you leave that 9 to 5 is, am I able to pay, let's say like 6 to 12 months of rent if you're living on your own? Am I able to sustain myself? Like, have I had savings? And I think savings comes with working that 9 to 5, right? If you're saving enough money and you're working in a space where, you know, the end goal is to build your own thing, but you know that in the beginning you need some working capital, so to speak. So when you're bootstrapping. So I think that's a very big thing to think about. And in my case, like I said, I quit. I had some money. I went and I got developers to build, like, you know, a prototype and all these things. And then I got to a point, and this is just the reality. Some people experience this, some people don't. But I got to a point where I did actually run out of money. Completely. And one day, I remember I called Adi and I said, hey, and we were dating then. So I called him and I said, hey, like, I don't know what to do. I'm out of cash now and I want to run this thing. And I said, you know what, maybe I'll go apply to a job. And I said it casually, and I did an interview, and I thought I didn't get it. And the next day I got a call saying, hey, can you start Monday? And I called and I said, hey, I guess I got a job now. You know, and this was in the beginning. And I actually worked that job. And I started working at that job. I think I did that. I was in that position for exactly 3 months, but I didn't give it my best. I couldn't. It was impossible to do both and do it well. And I eventually got fired from that job 3 months in. And, you know, because at the time I was doing a bunch of pitch competitions and things and growing my business. So I would take days off to travel to like Oakland for Afrotech, for example, or like all these places. A lot of people didn't know I was doing that, but I was, because I needed some running capital to continue building my company. And I wanted to do it side by side with my new 9 to 5. But I quickly realized it was not going to work. And, you know, after I got let go from that job, that was the day I said, you know what, I'm never looking for a job again, because I could joke around and get a job. so I stopped looking for jobs, and then I started to rely on other things. You know, like I said, I started doing more pitch competitions, winning some free money and grants and all that stuff, and that's what sustained the business and sustained me for a long time, you know, before even thinking about going to fundraise and stuff like that, which comes a lot later. But, you know, that's just my testimony of like, I tried to do it and I went back to try to do it again, like working the 9 to 5 and running the business. It just did not work out. So yeah, that's my story.
You can't even say third time will be the charm, because there will be no third time.
Not in this case. It was not.
So we'll get back to the sort of finance side of it, but I want to speak to something that you said on the value of being part of the system or seeing part of those problems. And so obviously you picked women's health, you picked the cardiac rehab space. I think one of the challenges that we hear from a lot of leaders right now, it's almost like a distraction problem, where there's just like too many inefficiencies or too many problems. And so I think there's a lot of people in their day jobs that are like, obviously, like we have a pediatric mental health crisis, we have an adult mental health crisis, we have a diabetes crisis, and so it's like you get caught up in like everything's broken and nothing is working. And so picking, like, do you, as you're gaining success in these businesses and getting things, do you already start thinking of like, what's the next problem that I want to solve? Or how, I think there's a lot of people that just really struggle with, how do I pick one problem and go sort of deep enough in solving it that I'm an expert, or that I have a company around it, or that I have a great career around this, because they just see all of those problems and they're like, well, I want to fix them all. I can't just choose one. How do you give some advice to someone in the industry that sees all those things to really pick one and maybe stick with it for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, so I think in business, there's this idea of what you call competitive advantage, right? Which is like, what's like an unfair advantage you have to solving a problem that someone else may not have, right? So when you think about having multiple problems so that you can look at, you really kind of have to think about which of those problems am I the best to solve, right? And which of them can I do? They're all very hard and very big, and they're probably they can take almost your whole life trying to solve those problems, right? If you even solve it. And so I think that the idea of like, you know, what are you best suited for? What do you have the right resources to do? Who do you have, like a team of people around you that you feel like, you can go fix that problem together? I think that, you kind of have to just choose those problems based on, kind of what you feel like, you can do, but then also thinking about like, what's the payoff too. So, some problems are, not all problems are equal, right? So like, for example, within cardiac, in my own business, there's heart failure, which is a huge opportunity, right? And we've kind of dabbled into it, but from a clinical perspective, one of the things with heart failure is that people that have heart failure, you can't really fix heart failure, right? Someone has a heart attack, you can fix that, and you can get them to a place where, a heart attack's an acute event, it's not quite like a chronic condition, right? And so you're kind of looking at, so when we looked at the whole cardiac space, we're like, okay, there's three buckets of opportunities. So one is, how do you get someone from having a heart attack in the first place, right? So we have people who, we talk about, amongst communities of color, how there's a lot of things like, high cholesterol or hypertension, right? And those things eventually become triggers that make people have a heart attack, right? So there's that prevention market. Then there's the people who've actually had the heart attack, right? And they're now on the fast track of having multiple heart attacks. And then the people who have heart failure, which is a chronic condition, which the heart is already bad, right? And so you're just trying to manage and optimize the quality of life. So when you're looking at that market, all three are very important problems. When you think about the first one, it's very important that we avoid people from getting a heart attack. But the problem is that, people, those symptoms for heart disease on the early on, they're asymptomatic, right? So people really, someone could be hypertensive, but they're not feeling like they're hypertensive, right? And so people really don't have a lot of motivation to change in that state, right? Because of, they can go by for a long time until they really have that acute cardiac event, they're really not going to be motivated. So if you try and do something there, it's important, but the motivation is very low. And when you think about the ROI for that opportunity, it's hard to like get someone to pay for something that may happen in the future, right? Now, in the middle state, which is people that had a heart attack recently, now that market has people who are very motivated, right? So someone's had a heart attack, they've gone through the surgery. When you then tell them and say, hey, you need to quit smoking or you need to change your diet, they're more apt to listen, right? Because they're very motivated. And then from an economic perspective, they have, because they now are on this fast track of getting readmitted more often, there's a strong opportunity to save money for like a health plan or whoever is responsible for that person's healthcare, that the motivation is high. So in kind of like, in our one case, when we're looking at those opportunities, we kind of chose the middle path, because that was one where there's a high enough motivation and there's a big ROI to be solved, and we had a team that could address it. So that's how I kind of think about those kind of problems. It's really like, do you have the right skill set? And to, when you eventually solve this problem, will it be something that will give you the right return?
Yeah, I think to, healthcare, and whenever you talk about, whenever Adia talks about these things, I'm just like, you're like such a healthcare nerd. The way I think about it is just, it's different, right? I mean, the US, healthcare system is around like payers and who pays and ROI and money and all those things. And those are important things. And I see your perspective as far as how you guys chose where to work. For me, it was very different in terms of, I found a problem and I wanted to do everything, right? I wanted to build a period app. I wanted to do like a tracker, and I wanted to do, pregnancy, postpartum, menopause, everything. Like I knew I wanted to solve a problem in women's health. I didn't know what it was in the beginning, but I knew it was something, right? And I started to ask a lot of questions. That's where like customer discovery comes in. You're asking like, at what point in a woman's life cycle is she, dealing with this issue? Is she more prone to like going to search for things? And I know that's the reason why like pregnancy, postpartum, they're like the hot topics, because that's when a woman is highly motivated, like you said, to seek care. But there is, going back to competitive advantage, there is that point where we chose to play, which was more young women and targeting young women in colleges first. And the reason was because not a lot of people were playing in that space. And that was what really made us grow as fast, because we ended up going to a place where a lot of people were shying away from, because they were like, oh, would a young person even want to do this and want to pay? But a lot of what they forgot was, a lot of young people are most covered by insurance because they're under their parents, they're, with their school insurance and things like that. So thinking about it from those perspectives and knowing that not a lot of people are thinking about that. So how do I build something in a space where you're either a first mover or you have such an advantage, with the population? When you think about like overlooked and underserved populations, working in those spaces and making sure you're making an impact, because what's going to happen is, you would eventually, like in my case, meet a lot of like colleagues in the same space who are working on all the other things. And then you get to collaborate with them, because at the end of the day, you cannot solve every problem. For me, it's more like, how do we solve one problem that will create a ripple effect in a woman's life that would, filter into those other things, and eventually thinking about, okay, the loyalty, right? And stickiness. Because when a young person, I remember like the first bank account that I got when I went to college, and I used that bank account, till today. And, that's the same idea. If you introduce into a young woman's life today, she would end up using your product or a similar product through the rest of her life and get into the habit. So that's the way we thought about it. And to pick one thing to do, right? Because like I said, it was like, let's do everything. And one of my mentors back then, the first thing she said to me was around like the idea of like Amazon, for example. Amazon, when they started doing one thing. They got really good at doing one thing, and then they added other products, and they continued to do it. And they had so much, what's the word? They had so much, customer loyalty and experience and stuff like that, that when they decided to branch and do everything else, everyone was still using their product, right? So that's pretty much the way to think about it. Like, what is that small thing that I can do in the beginning that's going to cause a bigger effect? And I can do that very, very well before even considering doing other things. So that's just the thought process for me.
Awesome. We'll kick it to another question. We have a few questions in the chat, so we'll save the last 10 or 15 minutes or so to jump into those. So the next question is around just venture capital and day-to-day finances. So we opened up the call right before you got on mentioning Serena. So Serena's husband just announced that they are setting aside funding in venture capital fund for founders, basically saying that many times they have put everything into the business and neglect their own financial and personal well-being first. So we hope this isn't you. So for example, we just saw that Ade, and congratulations, just raised $6 million for Movement Analytics. The question is, does any of that money go to you? How do you pay some of the day-to-day bills, health insurance, 401k, and kind of walk away from the day-to-day job? So that's the first question. Then there's a part two, but certainly would love to be transparent about how venture capital money works.
Yeah, so in the personal finance side, right? So even if you're an entrepreneur, right? When you form your company is going to be, a C corporation or LLC, or it's going to have some corporate structure, and you technically are an employee, right? So there's two like relationships you have with your company or your business. So one is as an employee of that business. So you can be the CEO, you can be president, you can be whatever, and you're also a shareholder in that business. That's the ownership perspective, right? So from that employee perspective, right? So Movement Analytics raises $6 million. As president, I get the salary as president, right? So based on how much I negotiate or whatever my fair market, value is for my role, then that's something that my board approves, like, Ade's going to get X salary. So from that salary, personally, like all my personal bills are paid and things like that. So there's really that relationship with you as an employee to your business, right? And, your ownership in the business then comes in terms of like the control and what you can do and the influence you have on the business, right? So they're kind of two separate like relationships you have with your business. So, so that's hopefully that answers the first question.
Yeah, I think neglecting your finances is a very, it is close to home. Just because, and you might know, like I'm talking from like an early stage perspective, right? When you think about, okay, I don't have enough money to pay everyone. And when you start getting money in, you start to think about how do you, compensate everybody else before yourself. It's always the case, right? Typically, I mean, if you're a great founder, I mean, there's no good or bad way, but typically, if you're a founder, you want people to be happy, you want them to stay, you want them to continue doing a great job, and money comes with it. Of course, there's equity perspectives, but like eventually, when you start getting money in, you start to pay some people first. For the longest time, I wasn't getting a paycheck, even when the company started to, start getting some funding, because there was all these other people that I had to compensate first, when it comes to like contractors or earlier, founding team and all that stuff, like compensating them so that they're financially stable, to continue this journey with you. Now, that's what, a lot of sacrifice comes in, because you would eventually get paid for your time, and the rewards are great, right? Eventually. But one of the bigger things that I ended up doing, and a lot of founders need to consider this in the beginning, is, remembering that you end up spending a lot of your personal finances starting a business, right? So keeping track of everything is very important, meaning everything from like all the money you spend on like the first product or design or anything you pay out of pocket, like keeping track of everything, because eventually you would have to do what's called a founder's notes, which I ended up doing, with my legal team, that stated that the company owed me X amount of money, right? Because in the beginning, you don't pay yourself that much, but you spend your own money, and you might even defer your own paycheck for a long time. So eventually you'll get it, but you have to kind of, make sure you're putting all those things down and having records of the money you've spent. And then based on that, eventually you get paid. But in the beginning, you can easily not get paid. And yes, like we neglect our own finances because we're like, it's our business. We have to do everything. We have to pay other people. But, I'm glad that they're doing that as far as the fund goes, because, there has to be more money that's going towards founders. But I think founders need to really think about, how do I make sure I'm getting paid or compensated in cash, and also in, sweat equity as well. So.
Yeah, and I think Crystal made a good point too. I think you whatever money you spend on your business, you definitely should document it, and you should make it a loan to the business, so that eventually when the business is in a good place financially, you can essentially have the business pay you back for those things.
Yeah, that sounds like a gem there. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I was gonna say so while I had a like boring hospital administrator job, and then like a boring healthcare insurance leader job, I randomly at a like a lunch function type thing for the hospital and health plan, I randomly sat down next to a startup accelerator leader out in Philadelphia called Dream It. And just in getting talking to them, they said they have a bunch of sort of pitch competitions and companies that they select to go through this. And what they were looking for were health plan partners and things, so that they could bring the best of their pitch competitions every spring and then every fall to an organization. And you could get exposed to them, they could get exposed to you, you might learn something, you might invest, all of those things. And so I was just literally just by happenstance of sitting next to someone at a lunch and striking up that conversation, I got sort of introduced to this world of like, now I'm seeing all these new companies and interesting people solving interesting problems, and I'm starting to learn these things. I think a lot of I'll say us as like boring hospital administrators or boring health plan or boring some sort of like long-standing health tech type organizations, a lot of people want to be part of the coolness of healthcare right now. They see so much money flowing into it. They see some cool sort of advertising and things, and they know it's like just a very human mission of just, if you can change healthcare, it's so important to everyone. And so how does, besides sitting like at the right dinner table where you meet you or someone like you, how does someone get more involved in that sort of world? Is there like, or how does someone be helpful to you as well? So is there like a certain LinkedIn message that now gets your attention if a healthcare leader sends it to you? Or do you just like happen to be lucky enough to be around you at some point? Like how can people get involved in the coolness of healthcare?
I think, that's a great question. This obviously we're in COVID now and you can go to a lot of events and things like that. But the easiest way to kind of get plugged in is just go to a bunch of events where, people are, talking about healthcare innovation. And at those events, you're going to meet different types of personalities there. And, you learn what they do and you kind of figure out, how you can help. I think one of the things in terms of thinking of building relationships, it's really important to know that you have value and you bring something of value to the table. So you may feel like, hey, I'm in this boring healthcare job, and then on the other side, there's a founder like me and Crystal, and we're like, hey, we really want to talk to some boring healthcare administrators.
Can we be boring together?
Yeah. And so like your experience as as a professional, your networks as a professional, they're very, very valuable, right, on the other side of the table. So it's very important for you to feel like what you have is valuable. And so it's just running to people and just offer to help, and so ask them, you can learn more about what they do. You can, take them to coffee, kind of figure out how you can help, who you can connect them with. And then slowly as you start to do that, you learn more about, what they're doing. And then as you kind of plug them in and you kind of follow back with them and see how they're doing, then you start to get a sense for, so if, for example, if I got introduced to you and I pitched you, and then we came in and then you asked the rest of the team, or like, what do you think about that company? So I think that's one way that you can kind of get into the system. I think now the virtual events, I don't know how how effective those are, but LinkedIn is also a great tool too.
Yeah.
It's crazy the amount of people both of us have met on LinkedIn, where you just send someone a cold LinkedIn email and be like, hey, trying to build this company, would really love some advice, and people respond, so I think you just have to kind of get out there and see what's happening.
Yeah, I think I second LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn so much because, the amount of connections that I've had, even pre-COVID. So when I first started the company, like I said, didn't have any healthcare background, didn't quite know anything about the space. So I spent a lot of time connecting with doctors, just randomly, just saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing something in healthcare. Do you want to talk? Like, I want to get advice. So asking for advice is helpful, or like feedback, right? And telling them, hey, here's what I'm working on, and like sending a message. So I sent a bunch of those messages. And one of the first people who actually responded of everyone else turned out to be a really big philanthropist that was giving like a lot of money to like Planned Parenthood and a lot of places. She's a billionaire. And I didn't know who she was. I was just looking for doctors. And I connected with her, and she was one of the first people who responded and ended up, giving me some cash to like work on a project I was working on back then and everything. And this was purely LinkedIn. This was someone I had never met. It was prior to our phone call that I ended up Googling her, and I found out who she was. And that was like a big, big deal. Till today, she's like one of my favorite people, a huge mentor and supporter of what we do. And, based on that, that gave me kind of the confidence to continue to do those, to reach out to people on LinkedIn. And what has happened now, in my case, is a lot of people actually have been reaching out to me on LinkedIn and saying, hey, like I'm working on this thing, or I'm a student at this school, I'm doing my MPH, I want to learn more about your company. And because I spent a lot of time doing that in the beginning, I'm very receptive to those types of messages. I don't ignore those messages ever. I'm always like, hey, here's my calendar, let's find a time to talk. Because I remember being in a position where like I didn't know anything. These folks that are reaching out to me, they're doing their fellowships and all these things, they're into healthcare and they're reaching out to me. But imagine in my position, I knew nothing about healthcare. So, there's certain LinkedIn messages that come in and I think about it, I'm like, oh, wow. I remember I talked to a girl who was doing her MBA, and she said, oh, I spent Thursdays doing virtual coffee with new people on LinkedIn. And I was like, wow, you're an overachiever. Like I haven't spent that much time doing virtual coffee with anyone. I didn't know that was a thing. So, but somehow, she reached out to me and I responded. So, that's a great way, especially now that you cannot take anyone to coffee in person or meet them per se yet, at least. The last conference that we were in was actually the Advancement League one. So, so ever since
shameless plug, shameless plug.
You know, so
You said
yeah.
last and best, right?
It was the last and best, by the way. So.
Love that. And love that you mentioned LinkedIn. I think it's a great resource and also an opportunity just to connect with folks everywhere. So with that in mind, and Alex forced me to say this because we have an inside joke about this advice. So your advice can't be shine your shoes or to have an executive presence or anything cliche, or we'll have to end the call.
Okay.
So if you think about resources like LinkedIn or education, and you think about the folks on the call, they're members of the Advancement League because they're hungry to make a difference. And to your point, they really want to be a part of the change. So, what advice would you give folks on the call? And does that advice differ if they're a student right now, earlier in the career, or if they're, a seasoned executive, which we have a mix of both. So, in addition to resources like LinkedIn, what education, what things could these folks be doing to really give them an edge, regardless of where they are in their learning process and career?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's always a very hard question because I feel like advice, it's tailored to, like you said, your own background, your own situation, kind of your own goals. But in terms of generic advice, I always feel like one is that you're enough, right? I think a lot of times we just have this thing in our heads that always talks us out of any good idea that we want to do, and we always want to think that some people are special and that's why they do certain things. And I think that's one of the things I learned at my last job was just being around all these like really brilliant, smart people, and just realizing that like, hey, they're everyday people just like you, so you're enough. Whatever you want to do, you can do it. And just start with where you are and what you have, and you be surprised at like how much resources you already have just to do what you're doing. Especially if you're a career professional today, you're in the industry, you have a lot going for you. So that's one. I think in terms of just if you're thinking about the entrepreneurial path and just how to think about things, I think Shark Tank is actually a really good show to watch and just get like a lot of philosophy, just how to think about businesses and what investors want to look for. I think that's a good place to just get entertained, but also just get your head spinning. Even as an entrepreneur today, every time I watch Shark Tank, I'm like, wow, like I get some new ideas just from like listening to it. So those would be two easy ones that I recommend.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's about Shark Tank is great. We have a lot of items in our house from Shark Tank, by the way. Huge supporters of entrepreneurs on Shark Tank, by the way. So I think that's a cool place. I think back to the point of stage and how it's different in different stages. I would say if you're in school, to play the student card as hard as you can, because once you leave school, you become like everybody else. That's looking for help or advice or trying to pick someone's brain. If you go and you say, hey, I'm a student at this and I'm doing this and I'm thinking about, ways to innovate in healthcare, people are more responsive to that for many, many reasons. There's so many, networks and stuff in school. I think that's a big piece of going to a school or doing a program. COVID has made it kind of harder to connect with people in that way, but I still think there are networks within, organizations or like institutions that you can like benefit from when it comes to like even like the pitch competitions and grants and money that's available to students to build things, and the advice that's available to build things. But also, as an individual that's going to the space, one of the big things to think about before you start a company is, what about this thing that I'm doing is going to make it fail? That's a hard thing to think about, but it's one of the most important things to think about. Even going to people and saying, hey, I'm thinking about building this thing. Like a lot of times we go to people for validation and we want people to say your product or your idea is great, it's the best. You should actually do the opposite in the beginning, to go to people and say, hey, I'm thinking about this thing. What about this do you think is not gonna work, right? And the more people you ask that question, it will save you a lot of time, because you're not going to build something that people will not want, right? Versus, going and people giving you the hard truth that, hey, like, there's probably a reason why this thing does not exist. And maybe it's because of regulations and things like that you're like, oh, like, why, healthcare is healthcare, like, and you go in and you're like, oh, they haven't passed that bill yet. So you're not able to do that. So if you know that, at least you would know, okay, this is something I cannot build because it is out of my control, period, right? Versus going in super optimistic into a field where, it's impossible. So asking a lot of questions. I know there's going to be negative Nancy's there who are telling you not to do things, even though they know it's a great product. But the more people you talk to, the more you see like a pattern, and you know which advice is good advice and which one is just negative, comments, right? So you can decipher what's what. But one of the big things I have done is just ask people like, why wouldn't you use this product? Like, why wouldn't you do this? Why don't you do that? And then learning from there would help you innovate in the right way. And the goal is to make money. Like, what are you doing that people are going to pay for? I think that's the biggest thing, because you can have a passion project that no one's going to pay for, versus having something of real value that people cannot do without. I think that's like a very important thing there. So.
Great advice, babe.
Absolutely. Kudos. Love that. That's fantastic. So all those questions were a combination of folks that submitted us questions before, and we just got a new one in the chat, and I think it's for Ade. She says, and this is from Ashonda, has there been any consideration into expanding the current telehealth model into pulmonary rehab?
I get that question.
So you mentioned
and the answer is yes. It's on our roadmap. I think we're going to launch a pulmonary rehab product next year. So,
is this breaking news? Are we the first? Are we the first to hear that? It's like an album release.
Yeah.
Speaking to the mic. Speaking to the mic.
It's cooking for sure. So.
That's an exclusive. We're recording this. We're going to find a way to make that exclusive. So shout out to Mashonda for that question.
Good job.
Fantastic. That is awesome. We got about 10 minutes left, hopefully. If you have questions, please drop them. If not, we're extremely grateful. Alex, I don't know if you had any more roll in on your side. I know some folks were emailing and texting you, but this has been extremely beneficial. And certainly as we think about, most of our members are in healthcare, around healthcare. I think there's value to have friends like you all, which certainly you just gained 11 more friends tonight, and also just to have that entrepreneur spirit and to be working with the lens of looking for issues and looking to solve issues. I think a lot of value is going to come from that mindset. So we appreciate you all.
It's definitely a pleasure being here and answering the questions. And feel free to add us on LinkedIn. Like Crystal said, we're always open to those relationships. And I think one of the things about being an entrepreneur is you don't get here by yourself. And it's a lot of, most of the deals I've done are from like the most random conversations with people. So one, we're always kind of looking to pay it forward, and be open to people that are coming up too. Right. And two, you just really never know where things go. So please feel free to connect with us, and we'll be happy to just answer more questions that you have.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. I think the obviously taking away a ton from this, but two of the things that really stick out, or a couple of things that really stick out. One, I love that you said that you're enough. And so I think that's just incredible advice. And I really appreciate you giving it, because I think you do have that platform and view that people obviously look to both of you as super outwardly successful. And so I think when any of us look to someone that's successful in our field, it's very easy to be like, I'm going to ask for advice. And a lot of times the person feels obligated to give it. And so that's where me and Antoine joke of like, the advice usually comes and it's like, you need to like wear a nicer tie. And like, people just feel like they have to give advice. It's like, you got to dress this way, or like, you really need to like make sure your shoes are always shine. So being able to just say like, you're enough, and your dreams and hopes and like the way that you can get people on board, I think it's incredible. And I think it's something at Geisinger, I didn't grow up like around doctors or things. And so like a brain surgeon seemed like just alien life form to me of like someone can do this type of surgery. Like, I don't know if I'd met a brain surgeon really before. And I remember just because of how the like fellowship and things worked, I was around a lot of the residents and just got introduced to that like medical community. And so I was at a sort of prominent brain surgeon's house because his kid was the same age as my kid. And it was like a little birthday party gathering. And I remember him like really, really struggling to order pizza for the kid's birthday party. And so he was really like debating, like, do I order 2? Do I order 25? Like the thought process of like, I just have no idea how many pizzas to order, what kind, like, what do I do? And it really like helped humanize that aspect of like, it is so true that you're enough, like your dreams and hopes, and you can really do some of the most successful people that we see are some of the hardest workers, obviously. And so that was the other point that I loved. I think some people, it's easy to see a press release and we think like, ooh, they just got money. Like that makes it so much easier. That like all they had to do was ask and they got money, and like now they've got this company. But it's incredible to hear the like failures before, or the businesses that started and didn't catch on, and the pivots and the name changes, both personal and professional name changes. We'll throw that out there. So it's awesome to hear the years in the making. And so I think that's incredible too, of just whether it's a career or entrepreneurial journey, it's real hard work and real sort of passion and things. So thank you both. The other thing that I was going to say, and it doesn't have to be right now, but we always, with all that we try to do, we try to pay it back. And so the time that you've given us, we probably, you didn't negotiate well on the salary side of this hour, and so we got to figure out how to pay you back. But I think one thing that we can do, we've attracted really incredible members. So we have a couple really interesting entrepreneurs, one solving pain with virtual reality, and who has like a really awesome company. We have orthopedic surgeons and a couple other physicians. We have health insurers, we have hospital leaders, we have a couple health tech people. And so if there's a way that after this call, you can just send a one-liner of here's sort of the best person to talk to at those companies. So if it's a hospital, like we want to talk to the director of cardiac imaging or of cardiac rehab, or we want to talk to this person, or if it's a health plan, here's the 3 titles that are most likely for us. And then like, here's the contact from your business. I think there's a bunch of people spread across this call and spread across our membership that will say, and it gets them to feel part of the coolness too. They get to be the people at their organization that are like, hey, I introduced Blue Cross, whatever, to Kira Health, and I got to see that. And so we would love to give back in that way. If there's a chance, just say, here's who we want to meet, and here's why it's meaningful to us, and here's the easy button. I think there's a bunch of just really quick, easy emails from the people on this call.
Awesome. That's great. I think that's one of the perks of having friends that are inside of healthcare in the system. I remember a friend of mine, was working at one of the larger health plans, and she kept complaining to me and saying, hey, like, I want to start my own business. I want to do this. And I said, stay there, please, because I need you in that seat. I said, you have to stay in that seat because, when I need something, I know who to call. And I was just like, stay there so we can make enough money. So when you're ready to leave, I can fund your next venture.
There we go.
So, paying it backwards and forwards that way, because we all need each other. And just going back to, like I said, I came into this space not really knowing a lot about healthcare. And the reason why I started to gain some traction was talking to folks who knew, healthcare in and out, who were very, sharp. I always say, like, I have hired some of the smartest people, like everyone that I've hired in my company, I consider them smarter than me. And that's important because you need those things. Like going back to the doctor, my co-founder, she probably does not know how to order pizza because she's a doctor. So when we're together, you could always feel that dynamic where it's like, she's leaning on me for things and I'm just like, I can't survive without you. And, it's mutual in that way. So yes, thank you very much for offering to do that and just making those connections. We always need it. Yeah. We're always looking for like payers and, health systems and stuff that we can collaborate with, and folks who are in the seat, like my friend, who can say something about what we're doing. So thank you.
One last question from one of our clinical members of the advancement leagues. The last one, she says, as a nurse, how do I go about finding a team? You know, a team including someone for marketing, bookkeeping, medical director, staff for a clinic, has the vision, but is any quick tips for finding a team outside of standing on the side of a road with the sign? Any quick websites for finding a team?
Finding a team. I think I always recommend AngelList for finding people. I just made a bunch of hires and all of them were from AngelList. And you can actually go to AngelList and say like looking for a co-founder and you find someone, most likely. Somehow people are on there looking for random things. In an age where we're not networking, I remember like, you know, I used to go to a bunch of events and talk about what I was doing, and the people I connected with the most will tell me their background. I'm like, oh, I'm looking for someone to join our team for this. And that's how I made those connections and had those relationships. I think what's important before even thinking about building a team though, is knowing what specific roles you need to fill and why, and also when. Because, you know, sometimes some people rush into it and say, oh, well, I want to build a product, so I need a CTO today, like a technical person, but maybe you don't need that person today. Maybe you need a dev shop today, and eventually you would get that person, right? And timing is key, because you can, if you want a really good CTO, you're probably not going to be able to afford them in the first couple of months. So that's something else to think about. But knowing and having like a hiring plan, even when you don't have any money, having a hiring plan, you can put all the zeros and put like the minus at the bottom of how much you're going to pay. But, you know, it's important to have that plan. So as you meet people in your networking and research, you will start to figure out who fits where. And kind of plug them in. But look at AngelList, I know there's Facebook groups for like marketing people and salespeople and things like that. Those are great. But hopefully when the world opens back up, we can all meet in person again, and actually make those connections, because your early stage team members are very, very important. They could easily make or break your company or business. Those relationships are like marriages, and you have to be very intentional and careful when you're bringing people on and making sure they are 100% aligned with you, right? So being a nurse, or being in the clinical side and not knowing marketing and sales, you're not supposed to know those things, really. There's no disadvantage to not knowing those things, but what you can know is that even acknowledging that I need a salesperson, or I need a marketing person, that I need this other person, is like a step in the right direction. And then you would eventually fill those roles as they become important, through networking, through asking friends. Whenever I'm looking for, to fill a role, I always go to my friends first in my circle. I remember one of the roles I wanted to fill, it was actually Chelsea, that introduced me to someone in that role. So I always go to people and be like, hey, do you know someone? I know you're part of healthcare groups. And, always there's someone great in those circles that you're in, but you wouldn't know if you don't ask. So it's important to just ask.
I love that. And if you're not ready to hire someone, any place that you love to get resources and expertise, the Fiverr, the Upwork, any Upwork? Okay.
Upwork. Upwork is I still use Upwork till today. Even with like full-time staff, sometimes you're like, what is the brainless work that you don't want to be doing? And I always ask my team like, hey, what is taking too much of your time? Let's find someone on Upwork. So till today, I use Upwork for everything.
Yep. Love it. You mentioned that you can find anybody on AngelList, and you mentioned co-founders, and I saw Alex's face light up. So we have some talking and some we have a discussion to have.
Oh, really?
Gave him some ideas. He was too excited over there. But no, seriously, we won't hold you all up. We certainly appreciate it, and are extremely grateful. And this is the start of something special. So thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having us. This was great.
Thank you.
Awesome.
We actually have never sat in the same room like this to do anything like this before. He's
love it.
In the other, he came to my office. So because we are on the phone all day, so it is actually impossible to be in the same room.
Yeah.
So this was nice.
Our life's work is bringing people together. So you heard it here first. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
All right. Good night. Bye, guys.
Love and appreciate y'all. Thank you.